The following presentation is artist-to-artist advice for realistic portraiture, with a focus on how to find design inspiration.
Okay, so portrait painting, when I was a little younger, I used to think it was just a little dry, but that's because I wasn't really, I don't know, I just wasn't really thinking about it the way that I do now as an adult. I always loved the fashion and the clothes, but now as an adult, it's so interesting when you find these vibrant portraits to find little hints to the past. Look at how lifelike. This is a pastel on the left. And what I love about it is I think this is the single most modern image of someone in the 1700s that I think I've ever seen. You just feel like you're almost talking to her. She was an opera singer. And actually, what I think is really cute is if you can read the letter, which you can't on my screen, but if you were to see this pastel in person, you can actually read the letter, and it's actually a little bit flirtatious and a little vague, and it gives even further hints into her personality. And I just think this is such a great portrait. This one was done from one brother to another. There was a group of brothers. They were all the sons of one of the Pills. Anyway, they're all named after artists. You can definitely tell when you're hitting across this same family because they were named after the great artists of the past. But what I love about this is, again, don't you get a sense of how fantastically nerdy this young man is? He is very bright. And I just think he looks so appealing, like you could just talk to him. But it gives you so many cues. I love this old one. This is one of the older portrait paintings in this entire presentation. And what I love about it is, again, so relatable, very, very well done. And this is just way older than you would ever think. It's a good way to remember people when you do these portraits. Some of the portraits are made to show power. And what I find interesting when I look at a society painting is it's really interesting to see how the sitter wanted to present themselves, whether they're decked out to the nines with all their nicest clothing and they're showing their status and they've got all their jewels, or sometime in around the time that Sargent was painting, it actually became considered kind of gaudy to show off with this much jewelry, but you were still kind of allowed to have nice dresses and understated jewelry. So it's very interesting to see the symbols of power change over time. And this portrait of Scott McCallum, which disclaimer, I don't even know what party he is. I'm using this because it shows a very interesting shift of power. Like, he wants to be a man of the people. These were obviously portraits on the left that were made to elevate them into a place where they're not actually very relatable. They're actually above other people. They're powerful. They're showing that they're kind of better than. And then on the right, it's very interesting because, yes, he looks very put together, but there's also this kind of like, hey, trust me, look at me, I'm one of you kind of feel to it that I find very modern and very interesting. I really like self-portraits a lot because no one knows you quite as well as you know yourself. And it also shows not only the style of the artist, but also kind of sometimes an intimacy. That's Zenaida Serebriakova, and I don't know if I'm doing her name any justice because I've only really read about her, but her life story is really something. I mean, she lost her husband really young and was taking care of her children, and she was actually a really high-powered painter, and she loved her children, but she had to spend long time periods away painting on various jobs. So if you read her story, what a tough lady and what a talent. I think it is really interesting, the intimacy that she is putting into this portrait. Meanwhile, Sophonisba Anguissola over here on the left top, again, apologizing for my pronunciation, she was a really, really early court painter. And so here she is showing herself, despite being young, she wants to show herself as highly competent. So now she has herself set up and she's saying, I am a serious portrait artist and I am able to do this very serious religious art. Meanwhile, you have Judith Leyster down here on the left. And this is amazing because look at this expression that she's got. This was from life in a mirror, and yet she just looks like she's about to talk to you. How she managed to capture herself in such a candid seeming position. And then also she's showing how skillful she is at capturing this man in her painting in a very candid looking position at a time where that was just tremendously hard. She's showing off her skills, and certainly she had some chops. They often used to mistake her for the main old master of that area, and at a time where they weren't very eager to attribute things to women artists, oftentimes her artwork would get mistaken with his, and they would attribute it to him. And as they've gotten to know her artwork better, they've been kind of taking back some of his work and saying, oh, never mind, that was actually Judith that painted that. So I really love this one of Lin Wei. I think it shows so much personality. And she actually has several really great self-portraits on her website that you can go see. And she's modern. This is Aline Danielson Gambogi. And again, sorry about the pronunciation, but look at how soft this is. She's one of the first painters that was allowed to go to the academy. And so it's really neat to see how she just holds right up there with the male counterparts. And I guess lately I've been looking a lot back at art history and just noticing that there's a lot of talent that maybe wasn't as promoted, but it's always been there. There's always been really good women and really good painters of every ethnicity you can imagine. So speaking of ethnicity, I really love some of the older portraiture that captures cultural beauty and costumes that have maybe were everyday or traditional holiday wear that you just don't see anymore. It's extremely beautiful. This one is actually contemporary on the right. This one from Jean-Léon Gérôme is actually quite old. I think we're talking 1800s here with this one. But there's a timelessness about these more cultural costume portraits that I think are really interesting to look at and very beautiful. So then we kind of get into a place where you can blur your genres just a little bit, and you can do portraiture that has a little more going on in the image, like these two that tell a story. On the left, there was a war correspondent named Tom Leah, and he was actually part of a special World War II group of artists that were taken out to the almost front lines, and they were to paint the war because they had done this during, I believe it was World War I. The army, just one branch had done it. And then in World War II, the other branches saw the importance of documentation, that although photographs were able to be taken at that time, they felt like artists could capture things that you couldn't capture in photograph, especially at a time where you didn't have color photography. And so he was sent out and did some of the most haunting artwork, I think, from that World War II project. And this is showing the 2,000-yard stare. You know, this is just a guy in complete shell shock. On the right, there's a little bit more of a whimsical feel to this one. This is modern. This is Casey Childs doing a fun little poke at our beauty routines with all the wonderful bottles and scents and chemicals that we use to maintain our natural beauty. And speaking of beauty, it's okay to just make a portrait that's sheerly about being beautiful. Beautiful brush strokes, beautiful people. I just really love both of these. I think they're stunning. And these are both from modern painters that I think are really, really talented. They're really nationally known. They have incredible reputations for good reason. They're both tremendously skilled. I wanted to point this out, and you definitely already know this because I saw the diversity in your portraits that you handed in the slideshow, but I just wanted to point out that great portraits can be made from anybody who looks any way, really. You don't have to be a certain age or nationality or anything to have a really great portrait made. Also, I just wanted to point out these four, these right here, the dressmaker, the self-portrait, from Richard Schmid, he just passed away this year. Anna Bain and Robert Liberace, they're still working. Daniel Green died about 2 years ago, rather contemporary. But Anders Zorn, that's a really old portrait from back in the late 1800s. And there's a timelessness about all these, really. And I know that I tilt towards realism. I really enjoy that. But there are so many beautiful portraits that are expressive, that are utilizing other techniques to be expressive and not like a photograph at all. And it's really exciting to see what can be made. You don't have to stay to the realism realm. I think all of these are really beautiful in their own right. So now we're going to switch gears and I'll show you a little bit of my work, and I will talk about how I came about designing each piece. So this is one of my older portraits. And Dawn, actually, we were in a show together when we decided to do self-portraits, all four of us that were in the show.
Yep, that was right.
And this is, I decided that I kind of wanted to be a co-star. I didn't want to be the solo performer. So I brought in some flowers and birds to kind of help me feel more comfortable. And what I decided to do was plumb the depths of my garden and my favorite flowers for symbols of the diverse places that I had lived and the things that I love to grow in my garden. Every bird is one that I had an especially interesting experience with in one of the states that I lived in. And then there's this little bonus guy up here because although I haven't really lived on an island with an EEV, I just couldn't paint a painting without an EEV. If it was going to be a bird painting, it had to have one of those guys in there. But you'll see, I grew up in Utah, so there's a meadow lark for that. That was the sound of summer. And then there was a mockingbird when I lived in Boston that used to sing really beautifully. In Wisconsin, I used to like to see the bare branches against this red of the cardinals. And then
Oh,
in
cardinals,
Colorado.
that's the theme.
Yeah, I love cardinals. And then there were yellow-winged blackbirds. That was the first time I ever really fed birds in my yard back in Colorado. And I grew really fond of those guys. They'd just come in droves. And then there's also a hummingbird up here from El Paso. That was one of the, El Paso wasn't a super alive place, but one thing that I really appreciated is that there were just the most beautiful oleander and little hummingbirds just to add at least a little color over there, you know. Lots of cool cactus, but just not a lot of flowers and color. Interesting contrast to living here. So the inspiration for this was actually, I was kind of looking at Frida Kahlo. I liked how she had animals and plants and really imaginative elements. It doesn't feel like it's just about her. It's also like she's projecting things about what's going on in the inside of her head, outside and around her. And I thought that was really cool. So I did my own version of that. This is a portrait that I did of my daughter and our cat. And it's Alicia and Galaxy in the garden. And I forgot to put the size on it, but it's a strange size. It's 16 by 24. Which shouldn't be strange, but it just is a little longer than usual. My inspirations on this one were, I saw this beautiful painting by Olga Suvorova, and I just love her work. She does the most beautiful garden portraits, and I thought, well, I want to do my own version of this in my style. And I also really loved how Celia Bow, in this portrait, she had the eyes of the woman and the eyes of the cat the same color. And so I employed that same feeling with my daughter and her little cat. And then also, so her skin has this almost porcelain feel that some of Bouguereau's sitters used to have. So I was really looking at the way that he handled his skin tones when I went to go paint her. And so again, just looking at those influences now, you can see how it's not, it may seem to come out of nowhere, but actually it definitely has origin points, and it doesn't look exactly like any of those origin points. But once I show them to you, you see how I have incorporated those into my own work. Just find the things that you like and be able to identify why, so that you can work it into your own work. So sometimes things are just kind of more straightforward. This was done partially on site and partially in my studio. And this is a friend of mine painting on her lanai. And it was fun because I got to try to paint her style. Here she is working on a painting of her palm tree. And she really did paint that. And this really was her underpainting for it. And it was beautiful when it got done. It looked like that, but with the real colors on top. This was just her underpainting. But I have to say, I just was kind of thinking back to the man with the geraniums that we saw in that first slide. I was kind of thinking, well, I want to show her in action. I want to show people a little bit about what she does and not just do a portrait where she's passively sitting with nothing around her. So here is where I am stepping into more of a narrative realm. So with this painting, this is my other daughter, Sora. And the title of this one is put in as if it's computer code, as if we are being programmed. The title is Internet Series Function Distract User. I'm making fun of the fact that we are sitting here on our computers, enjoying other people's vacation photos. And maybe sometimes we miss the beautiful rainbows that are outside of our own houses. I mean, really, it is this beautiful sometimes outside my window. For all I know, right now it is gorgeous out there. We just kind of get into our screens, but what's really funny is it just has this way of distracting us. So the reason that I thought of that is I was thinking to myself, you know, I really haven't done any interior scenes. And I saw this beautiful interior scene by Anna Anscher. And here was a woman working at a piece of machinery, a sewing machine. And I thought to myself, well, why haven't I seen people paint people at the computer? Because that's where we work now. And I guess it's not beautiful per se, but actually anything could be made beautiful. So I decided to go for it. And then also I have to, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention David Bowie as the inspiration for this entire series, because when he passed away, I was really intrigued by his last album, and I started looking back into his history and watching some of his old interviews, because I think he's a rather bright person. And he had this wonderful interview that he did way back in the early 90s where he had taken on an internet company because he saw this as the wave of the future. And the interviewer was actually laughing at him. He's like, you know, well, you can laugh, but back when the telephone was invented, you know, there was one per city, and you mark my words, everybody's going to be on the internet in the future. And that the interviewer was actually kind of laughing at him. And look who turned out to be right. I'm just saying, you know, here we all are on the internet. So, so he was quite prescient, and he got me thinking about the fact, he said something like the internet is actually something like a hive mind, or something bigger than all of us. It's this almost alien intelligence that we create together. And so I've been thinking about its influence a lot. And I've done a couple of other paintings on that subject. This is the other one that I will show you today, which is internet series Void User Identity. And here I really didn't take inspiration from any paintings for my composition. I was really basing it off of daydreams. Honestly, I was just thinking, how am I going to show this concept that I have in my head? I really want to talk about how that person that you are online with could really be anybody. If they're not showing on their camera, we all have these little avatars, these cute little cartoons or pictures, and we can claim to be any gender, any age, anything. So I might do this painting again, but have it be a guy sitting here. I've been thinking of doing that, like just to use almost a very similar look of avatar to this, but have it be a completely different person sitting here, just to kind of complete this. So I kind of almost consider this to be an incomplete half, but here is one half. She is presenting herself. And what I told her to do, this is a cosplayer, and she has this very normal, amazing, intelligent existence by day. And then she's this amazing cosplay person, which is where you dress up in costume online. And so I just told her, I want you to just choose something and dress up however you want to present yourself, as if it's your avatar. And this is what she chose for that day. So this portrait is an allegory. When in late 2019, I broke my ankle completely, and was in a wheelchair for about 4 months. And when I started to heal, I mean, it just took a huge toll. I'm sure a lot of you probably understand and have had similar things happen. But when I started to heal, I thought to myself how much I would like to be able to paint something that reflected and reminded people to take care of themselves, and also showed the feelings that I had about starting to heal. So here, her heart is bursting into flower, and this is a daydream again that I had, and this one was particularly vivid. It was like it burst into my head and I just had to go sit down and draw it because it was that strong. She's partly presenting and partly protecting her heart, and it's bursting into bloom with crocuses, which for me are they're the first flowers that break through the snow in winter. And so it, for me, has a thawing of the heart symbolism to it. And then all the flowers up in her hair, her flower hair, because she's bursting into bloom. It's coming from her mind, it's coming from her heart. And all of these flowers are also symbols of healing or of making the best of your bad circumstances, like the lotus here. Lotuses are known for growing out of the mud and being beautiful from this murky depths. Up comes this almost surreal piece of color out of the pond. So everything that is in this headdress has some sort of healing property. Sometimes it's like chamomile, where it's used for healing and medicine, or turmeric, and other times it's just a symbol of it. And also there was a poem on the side that I wrote to go along with it, but I figure you probably had a chance to read that. So when I was doing this portrait, the biggest thing for me is it started with an experiment, which was, what would a purple underpainting do to skin? And the answer is, it worked really well, but only because I layered it with a complementing skin tone on top. So when I was trying to figure out where I wanted her skin to land, I actually used John Singer Sargent's portrait to find the skin tones that I wanted to nail, because the original photo of the lady was maybe a little photography-ish, and I didn't feel like her skin tones were very rich. So I went in and I edited them. And so now that you've seen that, you can see that I was looking to his yellows and his kind of reddish shadows and stuff to bring, and then the purple actually shines through that and adds, and it makes it unique to me. It is now a little bit different. So this is getting into figurative, but it was also kind of portraiture, because I did have to pay careful attention to the faces. This is 3 mermaids, and I wanted to do mermaids that looked more like they were from around here. And my inspiration is actually one of my college professors did this absolutely charming painting of 3 mermaids, and I liked that they felt like friends. But I actually even wanted to just make it a little bit different. So I took some inspiration from Native Hawaiian culture. I love their shell lay and the way that they make beautiful fashion out of natural materials. And so when I was designing, you can see some of those beautiful lay here on this mermaid. And then I took the idea of haku lei, but I used native seaweed. So that's native seaweed there. And then I thought, well, they might make like a seaweed kapa cloth, you know, and then sew little cowrie shells on there. So I got to design mermaid fashion too. But then this mermaid, I felt like it was also really important to have one that wasn't clothed, because that's just part of their symbolism. Mermaids are about the subconscious mind, and they're not controllable, and they easily go through these depths of subconscious thought as symbolized by water, and we can't really follow them there. They're freer than we are, and I felt like clothing is that way too. They should be free to wear clothing if they want to, or maybe not if they don't want to, because they're mermaids. So that's what they did. This piece was a collaboration that I did. I have a friend that writes really beautiful poetry, and I'm going to click over to his poetry right now. And we worked back and forth on this. I said I wanted to do something where we were responding to each other's work. So he wrote this beautiful poem here, and I let him, he doesn't get to be as creative in his day-to-day life. He's not a full-time poet. So I decided to have him set the theme, and something that I wanted to learn from him is how he shares everything. This was about learning to share like he does. So he set the theme as darkness, and that worked really well for me because I was working on my nocturne skills. And so this was my representation of him thinking, the way that things haunt you sometimes in the middle of the night when you're just by yourself and you're thinking and your mind is turning things over. And I wanted her to point towards healing, but also like this is actually a symbol of it's okay to grieve on this half. I'm using symbols of when you're in this mode. So the moon is waning. This is kind of a stagnant time, a time to sit in your swamp and just feel your feelings and gain from it the wisdom, so that you can come through this. And this was part of him working through that. And I was really honored to be part of that process and that he would share that. On a happier note, this is, these are kids of one of my really, really good friends. And they're out in a poppy field. She came up with the brilliant idea of taking them out there. I love poppies. And I had always wanted to paint a poppy field anyway. But when you take a portrait into a poppy field, then you have to think about priorities and how much you're going to develop certain areas of the scene. Because if every poppy was totally sharp, they would take the precedence and the kids would not be the focus any longer. So I had to think very carefully about skin tones and about how I was going to include and leave out details in various parts of the painting to make it so that your focus would be in the right area. And of course, being kids, there was not one given photo where they all looked good. So we had to use 3 different photos. But I just told her to keep the sun in the same position in comparison to the kids. And they only gave her about a half an hour of good behavior. So there wasn't a lot of sun shift. She just snapped a lot of photos and she sent them over to me. And from there, I know how to adjust it so that it looks more like you're seeing them in person. You have to bring the shadows up towards the midtones and take the highlights down towards the midtones a little bit because your eye can adjust immediately to everything that it sees, whereas a camera has to choose one setting and stick with it. And when I got into this, there were a lot of problems to solve. And I found this painting, after I had already started the painting, I found this painting and I was like, oh, this is so helpful. Look at how he's developed this. Although he put a little more emphasis on the poppies, still you can see how in his priority, the main focal point is kind of more down in here with these poppies. But the girls definitely are a big part of it. And he does this through color, but he does let them kind of take second string to these poppies right here. So I took some inspiration from him on how he handled and what level of detail he went into. And I also really like this pink color. So I actually borrowed that from him. Their original little clothing was a little bit different pink color. And I just thought this little bit of blue made it stand out really well. So I borrowed that. And I actually took the boys' clothing from some other color. I think it was like green or white. I took it into the blue zone as well, because I found out that that was a good way to solve the problem of the poppies. And so now they are the main thing, because the color of their clothing helps in that. It helps calm things down and bring the focus over to them. So here's what I think the takeaway is from looking at the way that I work. I think you can find inspiration everywhere. Find things you like, figure out why to make it your own. You don't want people to mistake it one for the other. If you get stuck, look at how other painters made your same kind of image work. Like if you're working on a painting of someone in a bright red sweater, search up bright red sweater portrait and see what other people have done to make it so that their sitter looks good in that bright red sweater. See what kind of strokes they use. So another thing that I've heard from many artists actually is stick to smaller than life size unless there's a good reason to go bigger. And this is because it's kind of weird when it's just a little bit bigger than life, unless it's up in a place where you need to have it be seen from a long distance. Also, you don't want to go too small. I like to make faces no smaller than my fist, because if I'm painting a face smaller than my fist, I'm going to have a hard time. I don't have the most steady hand of all time, but that doesn't need to make you so that you can't be an artist. You just have to be mindful of what you can do. And there are some people who can probably paint a miniature, but I like to keep my portraits no smaller than my fist, so that when I have a little bit of, so that I don't need to be so perfect about putting in that little eyebrow. Because even as it is, 1 millimeter makes people look really different. If you get the eye over by 1 millimeter, it really changes how they look. Make sure you have warms and cools in the skin, no matter what. Now, this could be anything. This could be choose any position on the color wheel and choose the opposite of the color wheel. And this is getting into this next helpful rule. The lights and the shadows are always complements. So if you've got a very blue light coming in, your shadows are going to tend towards the orange. If you've got a green light, the shadows are going to be red. If you've got a yellow light, you're going to have blue shadow, or like purple shadows rather. I find that really helpful when I'm planning my skin tones. I kind of think, okay, what is the axis? Where am I on this color wheel? What's my light color and what's my shadow color? And then I think about, if there was no tinge to the light, what color would the person's skin be? And then you can take the light color and add it to the skin tone, the base skin tone, and the shadow color and add it to the base skin tone, and adjust everything in between there. And that is a fantastic way to develop a very lifelike, vibrant, interesting color scheme for skin. And usually when people look like they're made out of plastic in a portrait, it's because they don't have enough warm and cool contrast. I would suggest to you, lastly, that you do at least one self-portrait. Even if you think you aren't a supermodel, that's okay. We've seen that beautiful paintings come from every type of person. No one knows you as deeply as you know yourself. And it's always absolutely fascinating to see how artists present themselves in their own portraiture. So that is pretty much the end. That is, I would love to take questions at this point and go into go into critique mode.